Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, exciting video. We're going to be talking about what you need to wear in the backcountry. I'm going to go over my layering system, and then I'm going to go over the fabrics and what you need to know so that way you can decide what you should be wearing out there and what's going to work well for you. Stick around. Let's get into it. All right, the first question is why a layering system? When you're out there camping, canoe tripping, doing all the things that you love doing out there, you're going to want to have a layering system. And that's because you don't want to have one piece of gear that's supposed to work for every scenario. In fact, it's pretty much impossible to find something like that. You want to have layering systems that will have each layer do a specific task or a variance of task, but it's not going to cover you for every scenario you're going to fall into out there. So you want to have layers to optimize the performance depending on the conditions that you're in out there. So what does a good layering system look like? Well, usually there's 4 separate layers. You've got your base layer, your mid layer, your insulating layer, and finally your shell. These layers can be used interchangeably. They don't need to all be used, and you don't use them in succession of each other. You could use your shell over top of your base layer just as much as you could use your shell over top of all 3 of the other layers. So with that being said, the reason that you're having this layering system is really to combat 2 factors. It's temperature control, and then it's also moisture control. And the moisture control aspect comes from 2 factors. You're looking at precipitation or perspiration. Precipitation is going to be from the elements, your rain, snow, sleet, whatever it is that you're going into, and also wind. But then you're also looking at perspiration. And perspiration is going to be from your body. That's coming from your sweat, your breath, and even when you're sleeping, when you're not sweating, you are still perspirating some sort of moisture into the air. And so you got to have a way to combat those conditions. Okay, so the base layer first. This layer is definitely your primary layer for moisture control that's coming from perspiration. That's because it's touching your body while you're hiking hard. It may be the only layer you have on while you're hiking real hard, or even in the wintertime. Sometimes you may just want this layer or maybe your mid layer on. But basically the idea here is that you want your sweat, you want your perspiration to be able to touch your shirt, touch whatever, get soaked up and kind of get evaporated out. You want it to push that perspiration out. Sometimes you want it to interact well with your mid layer because you want to pass that moisture on and basically get it off your body and keep you dry while you're working hard out there. You also want this layer to be quick drying when you stop, because if you allow this layer to be super thick, let's say it's you're acting like a mid layer instead of using it as a true base layer, what you'll end up with is a whole lot of sweat that's been soaked up, and you won't dry out. You won't quickly get to a point where you're not wet anymore. And so that can be very dangerous, especially 3-season and wintertime. Your next layer is your mid layer. This layer is unique. It kind of does a little bit of the insulating layer and a little bit of your base layer. The idea here is to have something that can get a little wet from perspiration and or from the elements. And so what will happen is you want to be able to have this extra layer for those cold mornings in the summer or in the 3-season time frame when you're hiking, and you want it to be able to soak up a little bit of sweat that gets gathered from your base layer and gets pushed to your mid layer. When it hits your mid layer, it will collect there and then begin to evaporate, and hopefully it'll do that fast enough so that way you can continuously stay dry. You want this layer to be a little bit tough so that way it doesn't degrade while you're working out there. So I consider it like this. The mid layer is kind of the working insulating layer. if that makes sense. Your next layer, the insulating layer, really that's your static layer. That's your layer when you're no longer working real hard. That's your at rest insulating layer. And so the idea here is to have something that's very light and packable, because you want something that you're not going to have on very often while you're working hard, while you're hiking, while you're canoeing, while you're hunting, while you're fishing, whatever it is that you're doing out there. You want this layer to kind of be reserved for when you're static, when you're at camp, when you're done for the day and you can relax. And this layer is really primarily focused on temperature control, and is not going to be focused on moisture control. And then finally, your shell layer. This is where I really learned the advantages to having a good layering system. See, primarily I would try to get this big jacket and try to go out into the cold, go out into the elements, and I wanted something that was waterproof, had some insulation, and kept me from those elements. Well, what I learned over the years is that that doesn't quite work for every scenario, because when it's not raining, when you're not worried about getting the elements onto your body, and you start working real hard out there, this big heavy jacket would get soaked up with sweat and it would have no place to go. And this would cause me to be wet anyway. It would cause more harm than good. So this layer is really essential to be kind of work in any scenario. You want it to be able to go on your base layer and be comfortable, but then also be able to cover your insulating layer when you're at camp if it's raining there as well. This layer also has some unique issues that will come from it, because you're worried about being completely waterproof from the elements, but yet you've got to figure out a way to not block yourselves from being able to get rid of excess heat that's built up while you're stopping yourself from getting wet from the outside. There's many different ways of doing that. A lot of people point to Gore-Tex, but we'll kind of discuss some of those little intricacies when we get into the fabrics, which we're going to cover next. Okay, so now that we know what the layering system looks like and why we're using it and what each layer kind of does, let's get into some of the options. Really comes down to fabrics. There is more than 1 million different pieces of clothing out there. I'm sure you're well aware. So it comes down to kind of what you want in your fabric, and then you can kind of gauge really how much you want to spend on that fabric, what company you want to get it from, where it's made, some of the other factors, but that'll kind of dictate how expensive those things are. But let's get into those fabrics so we can kind of dial in what you're looking for. All right, so the first fabric I want to go over is wool. Wool's been around forever. It's definitely one of my favorites. We'll talk about why that is later on. But wool kind of comes in a couple different things. You got different types of wool, whether it comes from certain sheep that is a merino. Merino wool will allow you to have this up next to your skin. It's very soft. It's still got all the attributes of other wool, but the fiber is thinner, and so it feels good against the skin. But it's also not as strong of a fiber as some of the other types of wool that are out there. You can get wool in varying thickness. I mean, from this shirt that I wear almost on all my backpacking trips, really on every trip I go out there, I have this this really lightweight shirt, and then it goes all the way up to a mid layer, and then ends all the way up to a jacket. And so you can really get wool to work for whatever thickness and whatever wool feeling you're trying to get out there, but you're going to have different costs depending on what you're trying to buy with wool. So why is wool a desired fabric to begin with? Well, for one, it's quiet. That's big for hunters. That's big for people who don't want to hear swishing while they're hiking or doing whatever. It's also flame resistant. So if you get a spark, you're working around a fire, working around a hot tent stove, or really in close proximity to anything that can burn something up. It's super good with that. You just kind of brush it off, and it should be able to resist that. Now, something like polyester, for instance, it takes that spark, forget about it. It's going to burn up instantly. It's also a tough material, so it doesn't degrade quickly. You can kind of brush up against, going through thorn bushes, going through things. It can be really resistant to tearing, and it's really quite tough. Now, merino wool, because that's meant to be up against your skin, that's not quite as tough as some of the other wool that's out there, specifically in jackets and things like that. So the other thing is moisture control. Wool is great for moisture control. What it does is it's not as good as like a polyester or something like that to get rid of moisture. It will collect it, and it will help evaporate it, and it will do a great job at that, but not quite as good as some of your synthetics that are out there. However, what's big to know about that is that because it doesn't get rid of it so fast, it actually helps you to stay warm while it's getting rid of that moisture. It's not immediately evaporating and immediately cooling you down. So sometimes that's a desired effect that you want. The other big thing with it is going to be, in general, it will keep your core body temperature the same. So it's good in varying degrees. See, wool isn't really just about insulation, but it's about kind of temperature control. It doesn't try to keep you warm. It doesn't try to keep you cool. It kind of tries to keep you regulated. And this is a big help, especially if you're trying to get one piece of garment that's going to work in varying degrees in varying situations. It's kind of does a lot of really good things when it comes to that. So those are the big things. Now, one of the number one things that I really love about wool is stink factor. Wool doesn't stink. I can wear wool for sometimes 3-4 days in a row, and believe it or not, it really just does not stink. I may stink, but the garment doesn't quite stink. So quickly going into some water source, a lake nearby or something like that, and kind of getting washed off, I can actually do that and then put that shirt back on and still feel relatively clean-ish as much as you can in the backcountry on a multi-day backpacking trip. It also helps when you're winter camping, because a lot of times I like to keep the same layers on if I can, as long as I can, so that way I'm not exposing myself to the elements. Now, what are some of the negatives to wool? Some things to think about is it is heavy. Out of all of the options I have available, wool is usually the heaviest. It's also expensive. People will pay top dollar for a good wool garment. Now, you can save some money. You can go to the thrift store. You can get an old military jacket and save some money. People will make different garments that you can buy and probably get to that reasonable price range with those things. But what you lose in that is wool has an issue with scratchiness and wind. So the thicker that wool is for the fiber itself, not thicker garment, because you can have small fibers in a thicker garment, and that's fine. But if you have a thicker actual wool fiber, that hits your skin and it kind of doesn't bend. And because of that, that's what makes it kind of itchy. Additionally, with those thicker wool garments, sometimes they're not woven really tight. And what that means is as they kind of move around, it allows air to kind of get in there. So you're going to find that although you'll stay warm, when the wind hits you, it might rob your heat. This is why a lot of people will wear wool, but they'll put some sort of layer over top of it. And this is why it's really essential to have a good layering system, because you can kind of combat some of the weaknesses of the different layering choices that you make with other layers within your arsenal to choose from. So with that being said, let's move on to the next fabric. All right, synthetics is the next thing I want to cover. Synthetics are, again, a big variance, really what you're getting here, depending on the company and depending on how well that material is made. Synthetics are man-made material. Think of your fleece, kind of like that poly pro or whatever it is, your different base layers that are made for really active stuff typically. And then obviously your fleeces are to keep you warm. So you can get a synthetic to kind of do whatever you want it to do, depending on what you're making. Now, synthetics are typically going to be cheaper than whatever natural fiber that you're choosing to use, such as down or wool. And but at the same time, some of the synthetics can be really, really pricey, so you got to watch here. But typically, you can try to save $1 on certain parts of your layering system here, where you can use something like a fleece. So what's nice about synthetics is when it comes to moisture control, they are typically the best. They will wick away moisture from your body and evaporate that moisture faster than anything else, even faster than wool. Again, wool is got its own advantages, and it does well with moisture control, but not as well as some of these synthetics. Synthetics have really, really taken that by storm. You'll see this on why people are constantly using a synthetic polyester shirt or something like that when they're at the gym or out playing football. You want to be able to take that sweat and get rid of it and really keep you dry while you're trying to work really, really hard out there. Some of its negatives is actually sometimes even due to that. You can get cold sometimes when using a polyester or using some sort of synthetic fiber, because sometimes it can evaporate so fast that it cools your body rapidly. And sometimes that may not be what you want when you're trying to not have to put on another layer. Let's say you're hiking, you want to be able to sweat a little bit, but you want that sweat to evaporate a little bit slower, like wool does, in order to keep you from having to put another layer on when you stop for a second. And that's kind of a constant battle. But in the summertime, maybe you just want this thing to get as dry as fast as you can. One of the biggest downsides, though, to a polyester or to really any sort of synthetic out there is the stink. They've come up with these chemicals they put in there to try to keep that from happening, but typically they will have some sort of learned stink is what I call it. It will literally be used and can stop from getting stinky for a little while, but then maybe after the second or third trip using it, for some reason I've noticed that these polyesters will stink faster and faster and faster. I'm not sure if that's due to the degrading chemical that's in there or what, but sometimes you can only go a day in a polyester before you're really, really stinky, and that's a big no-no for me personally. But depending on your use case, you may want to use polyester, or you may want to use fleece for a lot of the things. You could save a lot of money, and they're very comfortable. They're relatively hard wearing. They're not as great at keeping you warm when it's wet, like wool is. Wool is very good at keeping you warm even when it is wet, which I forgot to mention earlier, but that is a huge bonus to wool. Well, down almost gives you nothing when it gets wet, but this fleece will get wet, and yeah, it loses its main properties of keeping you warm, but it will hold some of it. You won't be as cold, and you won't lose all your insulating value out of that when it does get wet, whether that's, again, through perspiration or precipitation. Oh, and it's not very good around fires. That's another big issue with that. So if you get a spark on polyester at all, forget about it. It's evaporated instantly. So you'll get plenty of burn holes in your gear using a material like that. Whereas wool, take a spark, no problem. So those are kind of the considerations. Again, everything has its ups and downs, pros and cons, and those are what I have for synthetics. All right, let's talk about down. So down is one of those materials that is highly used. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with down because there's so many videos out there. But basically, down is a natural fiber. It comes from a goose down or duck down, depending on where it is, and you have a fill power on all your different jackets and things out there, or sleeping bags or whatever. And that fill power could be 800 fill power, which tells you how much down you need in something to get the volume to increase to a certain point. And the higher that number, the less material you need, the less down you need to fill the same volume to keep you warm. Now that doesn't mean that an 800 fill power down jacket will keep you warmer than a 600 fill, because it depends on how much down is in there, right? If you got a lot of 600 fill power down, it will keep you warmer than just a little bit of 800 fill power. You kind of watch out and try to figure out see how much down you're getting versus the quality of that down as well, because it changes the weight ratios and things like that. You're kind of looking for, in my opinion, your best bang for your buck is going to be a quality 800-ish fill power down jacket, sleeping bag, whatever it is that you're looking to do. Now, some of the big reasons why people are using down is because it's ultra light. I mean, you can't find a lighter material out there to keep you warm. However, it's not good with moisture control, so you're not going to be using it for any sort of moisture issue, whether that's precipitation or perspiration. You're not looking for it to be a layer that's going to deal with those elements. So you have to keep it protected from moisture. If it gets wet, it's pretty much useless to you. It will not keep you warm at all. It's also extremely packable though. So that packability is huge, because if you're going to use this layer, typically it's going to be for an insulating layer. Now that insulating layer is not going to be something you're going to wear all the time. Again, it's for something when you get to camp. So typically most people are looking at a synthetic or a down insulating layer. Pros and cons to each. Again, a synthetic will have a little bit of help with the moisture issue, but it won't be as packable as a down jacket. So you take down sleeping bag or jacket and you can compress it. It almost goes to like just a little ball, and yet when it expands, it's got this really great insulating properties. Now, with all the pros to down, and on top of dealing with the moisture control issue, you've got other things that you have to worry about, and that's because it's very fragile. And unfortunately, you can't really protect it too well, because down needs to have the room and capacity to expand. And to do that, you can't really restrict it. And so a lot of times you need lightweight materials on the outside that is holding the down in versus very tough material. So sometimes you'll find jackets out there like my Fjallraven jacket that does a good job with putting down in there. You'll see jackets out there that do an okay job, but typically you're going to find that down has very lightweight materials on the outside. And because of that, you've got to deal with keeping it dry and safe, keeping it away from fires, trying to keep it from getting thorns going into it if you're trying to use it while you're hiking or something like that. So it's a great material, but it's a fragile material. All right, so with all of that information, now I'm going to give you an example of what a layering system looks like by showing you my layering system that I currently use right now. I do think that it will depend greatly on your personal preferences and what you're doing out in the woods to decide really what you're going to get for your personal layering system. So I don't think there's really a wrong answer here, unless you're using cotton. That could be a wrong answer. However, for the most part, you got to find what's comfortable for you. What are you looking for in each garment? What are you looking for each layer to really do for you? Allergies can play a part, all sorts of things. So I'm just going to show you my stuff. This is not a review video of my personal layering system. I am not going to go over each one of my garments. The video would take forever. So with that being said, let's get into it. All right, first layer, base layer. For that, I'm a merino wool fan. I'm sure y'all already know. In fact, you're going to find a common theme here. I love wool. It's my preference. I have a thing with wool. I don't know what to say. But I use this merino wool shirt. Now, what's interesting is this is actually a mix. I forget. I think it's like an 80-20. And the reason for that, for me personally, is I want all the benefits of merino wool, but I like just a little bit of like a synthetic in there that's going to help keep the merino wool from breaking down too quick, because merino wool is a very thin fiber. And so I like to have just a little bit of a synthetic in there to try to strengthen the shirt. And it has worked flawlessly with this shirt. I've probably used this for 4 or 5 years now. Well, actually maybe not that long. Maybe 3 or 4 years now, because it took me a while to finally give up on those synthetic shirts. After that, I kind of have like a 1.5. I call it a 1.5 layer. I use it as a mid layer in the summertime, or maybe not even in the summertime if I'm not planning on it, but definitely kind of like those temperatures where it might get down to the 40s. I like to have my 1.5 layer, and that is a 250 gram merino wool shirt. This is 100% merino wool, and it's very warm, and it has held up well, so I'm very happy with that. I don't think, because this is a little thicker, I didn't really need to have a synthetic kind of helping to hold it all together. It's thick enough that it's held up really well. Now, what's great about this system is as I sweat in my shirt, it moves it off into this other base layer, this 250 gram base layer. And as this soaks it up, it's kind of pushing it out and evaporating that. And so I can actually hike in this for those early mornings when it is cold, when it is pushing 50 degrees. And at nighttime, I can still use it typically down to 50. That's all I'll need is this. But sometimes I'll use it in conjunction with a bigger mid layer. So this is kind of like that 1.5. But once we get into those real shoulder seasons, and you really start seeing those temperatures push down really to that 40 degree mark or below into the 30s, now we've got to have that true mid layer. For that, you got it. More wool. Now this, again, I think this layer is where you can save some money and you don't really need wool, but I personally prefer it because I'm around fires a lot, and I'm telling you, synthetics just eviscerate instantly. But if you can save some money and get some cheaper stuff that you're okay with getting holes in, and it's fine. There's really no problem. But this is what I have, and I have used this forever, ever since I started backpacking. And I used it for my daily driver, even when at work, when I was working on telephone poles. So this guy has some G1000 material. I didn't really go into that, but that is another great material to use. But plenty of videos out there on Fjallraven Gear, so look them up if you want. Anyway, so this is what I have for that layer, and what I like about it is it's tough. and I can use it. It's breathable. I can hike in it. I can work in it. I can do whatever I need. It's an active warming layer, an active insulating layer. Now, if anybody knows, I do want to upgrade that setup for that that mid layer, because I would love to get something with a hood. Maybe something that's a little warmer, but maybe not. Really, I would like to get a nice hood, because my insulating layer for winter is also an active layer for me because of how cold it is. Now that I end up using, again, wool. And I've already got a video out there on this, so I'm not going to go into all its details, but I use another wool jacket just for the winter time, and when I'm pushing into those really end of the 3 season, those shoulder seasons, when you're pushing 30 degrees or sometimes even lower, I want to have something that I'm going to be warm in, especially when I'm canoeing or cutting up firewood. I want something that's breathable, that's active, that's not going to degrade when it gets those temperatures down. And when you get into wintertime, you're almost always wearing some sort of insulating layer to keep yourself warm when you're not really working hard. And so that's why I like the wool. I can kind of wear it all day, every day, and keep my body temperature regulated without having to worry about destroying my insulating layer. Now, with that being said, another option for my insulating layer is down, of course, for backpacking and all sorts of things. This is what's going to keep me warm. I use it for my sleeping bags. I use it for my jacket. And I'm telling you, you can save some money out there, guys. I wish I could do I should do a review video on this jacket. But this I got from REI. I think it's the Magma something or another. $850 fill down. Get it on sale. I think it's like $120 is what I paid for this, and it's been going great. And guess what? You get a hole in it. It's a $100 jacket. It's not these Patagonia jackets that are $300 or Arc'teryx $600-700 for some of those jackets. So I really like that. You can save some money and be strategic with what you're buying. But that is what I choose for my insulating layer. Now, I will add a bonus layer before I even cover my shell, because really I have this Patagonia really big jacket. Now this is a little bit more pricey, but it packs down really well. It's high quality and it's big and really puffy. It's got a lot of down in it. And what I do is I use this as my last kind of bastion of warmth when I get to camp after hiking and doing everything in the wintertime. And I need that little extra warmth when the sun goes down and I'm finally just hanging out. This is great, especially when the fire starts to die down and you're looking for a little bit of extra warmth, or even sleeping in it. Awesome. So that's this. I would be remiss if I didn't cover, real quick before I get to my shell, some of the other things. I do use merino wool underwear. I use merino wool on my leggings. And then I use Fjallraven pants over top of that because I love those. Now, in the summertime, I have switched from Fjallraven to a synthetic. Video coming on that switch, and I will talk more in depth about that on another video. But yeah, for the most part, summertime, I've switched to a synthetic. But for really the colder times of year, I'm still using my G1000 material. Of course, we've got socks as well. I always have, my regular kind of no-show merino wool socks, and I pretty much just get them all from Darn Tough. But you can get different variances. For me, no-show socks for when I'm doing those backpacking trips. These are my, these will work because they're real light and they work perfectly for, those trips where I'm using boots, but I'm not looking to have super insulated socks on yet. And then I use these all year round. These are extremely warm, extremely thick, and I use them for sleeping in all season long. But then in the wintertime, sometimes when it really dips down to those 0 degree Fahrenheit days, I will wear these in my boots as well as an active layer. Last but not least, my shell. And I think that there's a lot of options out there. I've tried quite a few. I've pretty much just been sticking with this Outdoor Research 4A jacket, and it's been working out great for me. I like to have Gore-Tex. Now, the Gore-Tex is not going to keep moisture from piling up in there. Don't get fooled by it. It's really quite a gimmick in my opinion. However, what it does do is it gives just enough evaporation, just enough whatever, to make it feel a little less clammy when you're not working real hard. When you just have the jacket on and it's a little warm, you don't have that buildup of that kind of clammy feeling. And so why that's important is because I like to use a jacket as kind of a windbreaker when I'm at camp. And so sometimes I'm not looking for it to keep out moisture or anything like that, but I'm looking for it to protect me against that wind when I don't want to put on more layers and I just need a little extra help against that wind. So those are kind of just a quick down and dirty of what I have. There's plenty more that can be talked about on this entire topic, but I would be here forever, guys. So I'm going to wrap this up right now. Thank you for watching. Thanks for being here, and stick around for the next one.